What is going on? This is the Unpopular Counselor. Great to be here and great to have everyone that will be joining onwards. Today's discussion is that of mental health awareness. Why is that important? Well, that is a major component that has unfortunately been dismissed for decades, which we are now starting to see a little bit more attention. So, to add some flavor to this presentation with you today, what I'm going to do is share my screen, and it will be something simple to that of a notepad. However, what is important is that the information shared with you today is all mental health based. Why is that important? Because this is an opportunity to shine light on an area that has needed light prior to my existence 30 some odd years ago. So it's a blessing for the fact that there is awareness of this day existing. Awesome. In front of you now. First off, within mental health awareness, it is acknowledging that of our senses and how they are influenced. An example of this is your environment. What do I mean by environment influences psychology? Well, it's the variables around you that carry influence. So, a question that I often ask others is, how well do you read between the vertical and horizontal lines of what's going on around you and its influence on you by default? So, there are layers technically to the influence that we could be receiving on behalf of the fact of what's going on around us and then what's going on outside within our community that may have some influence on the quality of our wellness as well. For those that don't know, psychology is the study of behavior. Why is that important? It's on behalf of acknowledging the origin of our thoughts. For what happens with a thought is the conversion into behavior that leads into a conversion of action. So, in a sense, a pivot in which a behavior initially I had towards streaming a certain video game and pertaining to providing not only heals in the game, but also life coaching simultaneously in the process. And a pivot in which I had to be mindful of in the course of how it would take a toll on my mental health on behalf of all the previous things in which I had established in preparation for streaming all of that sort of content. What I quickly realized was, despite me realizing some things later than I wish I realized, it was the notion of how it was important for me to be aware of the influence I would have on others on behalf of the game in which I would be promoting as well. Through the use of their platform, what I would additionally be able to promote is in that ideal of play therapy. However, what happens by default is the notion of people being interested in what it is that I'm playing and wanting to join and be a part of that as well, which is understandable on the fact in which now so many people have flocked to the digital realm on behalf of living in a digital era, to the quality of making more meaningful connections in their life that maybe they would have done in person before we were in what is now a new technological era, especially as AI is becoming more of the norm. What's important to consider with AI is how it can be used for moral and ethical purposes. How does this apply to mental health? Well, there is a tremendous amount of feedback in which anyone can receive on behalf of using artificial intelligence. For those that don't know, artificial intelligence is comprised of what is initially considered large language models, representing that of how artificial intelligence is reviewing multiple fields of information, even if even if the software is reviewing one portion of that itself. A great example of this, and maybe someday there'd be a partnership, just saying, is that of Grammarly. They do a phenomenal job at highlighting the true purpose of artificial intelligence on the fact of how writing is reviewed on multiple facets to that of your grammar, your punctuation, your tone, the order of your sentences. There's so many things in which it's reviewing simultaneously that would likely take another person far more time to review and provide as many suggestive feedback opportunities as received by that of Grammarly. Now, you could use Grammarly for free for that option, but there's also the option for Grammarly Premium, which is about $11 a month. Now, I know that could be a little pricey. However, the amount of feedback that you receive from Grammarly Premium alone tells you more about yourself in ways in which you may not have considered prior. Why is this important? Because we live in a time where you have the amazing opportunity to write something down that means something to you on a variety of physical platforms, while also that of the notes section of your phone, or in addition, the way in which you make use of your draft section of your email. Why is that important? Because everything is going to all tie into the importance of acknowledging your own mental health and what needs to be addressed in the process of that. So I will outline a complex concept through the list of this Notepad app highlighting mental health awareness. So first off, we will start with mind to Notepad. Why is this important? It's a lot easier to put your thoughts on paper at first than to put them onto anything digital. Going back to the roots of us being human beings, it is far easier to lay something out on paper and then go off of that from there, especially with the notion of if you're content or writing is going to be reviewed by artificial intelligence, when that time comes, you would prefer to have the content that you want to have listed for it to review than for it to be reviewing as you're starting to list out the content. In a sense, you don't want the writing process to be hindered on behalf of not being able to write as freely as you would on that pen of paper. And the beauty to this is that once you have what you have written down, either on your notepad, on your phone, on your laptop, on your desktop, wherever it is that you put that information, what's important is to at least have something put together, even if it's not the final draft. So then you could receive feedback from artificial intelligence, and in this case, Grammarly, as they are also generative AI in the context of understanding through your specific preferences how you would like to come off to a certain audience. Now, I know that could seem like a lot for anyone to be hearing for the first time, so allow me to explain that a little bit further. So, before I was talking about LLMs, so large language models. And I was talking about generative AI. Feedback and tone alone are worth receiving on behalf of acknowledging areas of your life that you may not have realized were coming out the entire time, yet were setting you back from achieving certain results in which you would hope this time to that of maybe something you've learned in the past. It's so easy to hold on to parts of your past thinking that it is going to serve you well, not realizing it is actually hindering your brain from the operating capacity in which it is striving to operate at. However, it is easy for that to be hindered on behalf of holding on to grudges and hate, which in a sense closes off parts of our heart, which, come to find out, the heart is a muscle. So, an example of this, if you ever wonder if you're really present, you check your pulse. The fascinating component of this is wherever you check your pulse, is that you feel the beat of the pulse while also acknowledging that it is through the operation of the heart that manages to communicate all the way over to where you're checking the pulse, to which your brain understands what is going on at that time. For there to be that brain heart body connection, it is a reminder of why not only are you human, but you are also special as well. Please excuse me as I am just starting to get a cold. I hope to get through this quickly, but in the event that you hear me blowing my nose, just know that is what's going on. Otherwise, I will try my best to mute it at times as well. So, an example of my own mental health is acknowledging the fact that I may be getting a cold, but also understanding the care that I need to provide for myself to ensure that I recover in a timely manner, while also acknowledging the importance of getting rest as well. That yawn symbolized a reminder of why I need to do what I do from time to time, and it is that of setting an alarm for, in this event, I'll set it for 8 o'clock tonight, so then I can remind myself that it is time to get ready for bed sooner, and then make that transition to sleep a whole lot easier when the time comes, as I already see myself yawning now. With understanding that in the person that I need to take care of from within, it is important to be responsible when it comes to that. If we are not responsible about the adventure in which we would like to live, then we aren't doing ourselves any favor. So, what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to place this on mute briefly, but I'm also going to type out some stuff in which will go along with what you see already on this mental health awareness notepad. Okay, so I wrote down quite a few things here. I'm going to just start listing off. I can go into further details if you want. Let me know. So, for starters, we're going to go up here in the notion of how psychology is a natural science. Why is that important? Well, it's the fact in which, because it is a natural science, such as that of physics, biology, chemistry, it serves a purpose on its own on behalf of the fact that we are human beings, in addition to seeing how the behaviors of others can also be of influence on themselves and those around them. Why is psychology considered a social science more often than a natural science? It is on behalf of the expression of chemistry, physics, and biology having more of a background influence to that of our makeup and existence. However, it's the notion of if those things weren't working in collaboration, such as the heart and the brain working together, looking out for each other, then we would be dismissing the fact that there are certain variables that come out on behalf of the thoughts that are going on upstairs. It is the review of those thoughts that let people know a little bit more about what's going on with the individual. There is a possibility that someone struggling with mental health may not have the best diet for their situation, and as a result, that can lead to a chemical imbalance, especially within that of the equilibrium. Psychology is often coined a social science on behalf of the variables in which you can see expressed through words and actions. While the other three natural sciences don't highlight this as much, there are certain behaviors that can come out on behalf of there being a lack of awareness in the mental health profession when it comes to acknowledging how much deeper psychology goes in the context of our minds. Why is that important? Well, as mentioned here, thoughts influence behavior, behavior influences action. Whether that action is something spoken or something physically carried out, it is the notion in which that is actually happening itself. An example of this is sin. I didn't realize until attending church more often how easy it was for a sin of thought to be considered technically one of the worst sins on behalf of the influence it will have upon the following actions. Why is this important to keep in mind? It is the reminder of how when you accept the Eucharist, you are taking in a blessed sacrament. In a way, you are receiving not only something tangible, which is that of the Eucharist, but you're also receiving something edible as well. Where is that Eucharist placed? Upon you receiving it, you can place it on your tongue if the priest or deacon does not place it on your tongue themselves. I have OCD, so I prefer to receive it and then physically uh, put the Eucharist on top of my tongue. which also serves as a purpose of that, of how in the Bible the tongue serves as a rudder to the ship in which of words and influence of actions come out on behalf of our mouths. So, how easy it is to praise God on one end and then to defile others based off of the same tongue that received and placed this Eucharist on a pedestal can very easily be a tongue that defiles and causes hate on behalf of certain things that aren't entirely being checked upstairs. So there are some things that are worth me noting on behalf of acknowledging my own mental health. So I am neurodivergent. What does that mean? Basically, I would be ranked among those who have autism on behalf of being dyslexic, which I did not realize until after publishing the Burnt Out Story, and that I also have ADHD as well. Rather than dismissing these areas, especially on behalf of having a master's in counselor education, it's even more imperative for me to acknowledge this and the influence it can have in other parts of my life. And what I realized was along the way, there were certain areas in which I struggled in. And if it wasn't for my education and all the interventions I've had along the way, I wouldn't have connected as many dots to acknowledge certain areas of my life that I had to address and improve. For if I did not do that, I know I would not become more the man I am today that I know I need to be for my future family someday. So I'm grateful to acknowledge areas of my life in which once seemed to be the norm is now of something else, especially on behalf of acknowledging my own mental health. So when I wrote the Burnt Out Story, I acknowledged the fact of how, although I thought I was going to make it through 8 years of college, the additional year of college and the pandemic really shook up parts of my life that I didn't know it would influence until afterwards graduating in 2021. I knew when I graduated in 2021 that there was something I had to do about how busy while also uneven times would be on behalf of dealing with the bureaucracy component in the higher education system. And that's when I realized in my program, the best thing that I could do with certain people not doing their jobs is for me to write about it. And that's the best thing in which I did. And you can learn a little bit more about that in the Burnt Out Story. But it was just a notion of acknowledging that there are certain parts of a system that's in place. And what I realized as I was previously working for the state was the notion of how the design in place is not entirely people friendly to the extent of what it is promoted in actuality. I hope I said that right. So I'll say it again and I'll make it a little clearer in the context of me trying to implement a life coach program on behalf of a social service department and ultimately realizing that that was something not in not of interest on behalf of a system where the machine does not thrive off of those who receive state assistance to someday be able to further advocate for themselves. I know that concept may go over some heads, but I believe over time, as more people start to acknowledge their own mental health in areas that may be able to benefit from them giving themselves a little bit of more time and day to address that, which a notepad is a great example. I will circle back from that time to time to motivate others to start writing more things down. And in a sense, give yourself a few notepads so then you don't feel like one notepad has to carry all the ups and downs. Rather, have one notepad assigned for certain parts of your life you want to write about, and have another notepad side up for something else that you want to talk about or write about, and then go into further review with those. Because as adults, especially in your 30s, it's about addressing any mental health that maybe you didn't take the time to address in your 20s or even throughout childhood. It's tough for youth to address childhood trauma when they're still very much in the mix of a situation that may be initially causing certain things to be happening on behalf of that environment. Another example of how environment can influence psychology. Why is psychology so important? Well, I'm grateful it's starting to get the attention that it deserves, as this is something once people start to realize there may be parts of their life today that they're experiencing that are somehow influenced on behalf of unfinished business that they have yet to address in the past, which does happen more often than not. It's so easy to say something doesn't bother us when it appears in our mind from time to time, either through that week or sometime throughout that month. And for that to be a continued habit becomes a pattern or a routine that doesn't always help the mind and where that mind would like to be in the near future. Ideally, near future would be today, for today is the only day in which we have with us and to experience as well. So, why is also psychology considered a social science? Well, it's the fact in which, for it to be, it, the other natural sciences can't quite be explained to that of psychology because of how psychology influences the brain in a way where there's so many different influencers in terms of sensory reception, which people don't often talk about. You have your consciousness and then you have your subconsciousness. So it's, in a sense, you want to be present. That is within the sense of consciousness. However, it's important to acknowledge the variables around you and how they carry influence on your thinking and then your actions by default as well. Why is it important to acknowledge your own mental health and to acknowledge the psychological component in association with that? Well, not to get dark here, but when there's a thing called dark psychology, and what's important to understand with dark psychology is while you can learn new things about yourself to have greater conversations with others, it's also important to learn more about yourself without exploiting others in the process. As that's not fair to take advantage of others just because you know you could take advantage of them, and the good in which you think you're returning, in a sense, is more of for your own innate gains. It's tough to say karma don't exist, but I've seen a lot in life enough to say that the last thing anyone should be wishing is karma on another person. That's why I say I wish others well on their journey, because I am on a journey also. But getting over back to the mind to the notepad. So it's you putting your thoughts down on paper, and then you either through dictation of your phone or some form of speaking device where you can list out what it is written either through your note section of your phone or another platform and go from there. You could also take that information, you could send it to yourself in an email, and then you can continue work on pieces that maybe could form that of a blog someday. That's what I started off with when I wrote the burnt out story. It was the notion of me being in New Jersey, starting the burnt out story, and how for me to get comfortable with me sharing these things, I realized it would be best to put it in the form of a blog. Even if no one knew much about my blog at the time, it was the notion of my content being out there publicly. And why does that matter? For the more in which I'm able to accept from within, the more at peace I am with others knowing the truth in which, as a person, I always strive to seek. And the best truth in which I could seek is the progress made and necessary progress to be made on my own behalf for the sake of my wellness, and then the wellness I influence others by default. Within what we do by default, it is important to acknowledge how we have an influence on others as well. So down here, what I'm going to do is share a little notion of, you've heard of me, myself, and I, which is similar to the id, the ego, and the superego. And what I'm going to list out here is how they the second part may go over people's heads, but let's just get into this. So the first one, self-centered. When you think of me, it's easy to be that way. When I say it's all about me, it's real easy to be self-centered in that situation. When I say I'm going to do something myself, that is on my behalf. And then I, Technically, it's on behalf of myself, but also the origins of my existence. So I exist on behalf of my previous lineage, which is often when I say, how often do you pay homage to your lineage? So that's how I would go in for me, myself, and I. Why is it important to acknowledge that concept of me, myself, and I? It's the notion of how there's multiple versions of ourselves that exist through our perceptions and that of how much life we've already lived thus far. So, for example, when I look back on the past 20 years of my life, I feel a lot older than I would have imagined on the fact that somehow 20 years has passed. And even at 20 years past, I was still at least 10 years of age. That could be the reminder of just getting older. However, it's also important to acknowledge any areas of growth that we may have made from within. So, an interesting activity that I would do during parts of graduate school was an activity where it was called Look Clear in the Mirror. And so the whole point was, while youth seeing themselves physically growing, what was important was for them to review the progress going on upstairs. And so some questions in which I would ask them to write about is their perception of themselves 5 years ago, their perception of themselves now, and then their perception of themselves 5 years from now. And so the whole purpose of this activity was for students to realize there's a lot more going on than just what they see in the mirror. Why is that important? For how easy it is that youth misuse their time and energy during grade school, especially middle school and high school, where certain tendencies can really cause havoc on certain parts of their adulthood. I'm glad I'm talking about that right now, as there's an area in which I really want to talk further on to, and maybe I can do that on this session today. It is the notion of how, as a society, we are setting up youth for success. And are there any areas that maybe we need to reconsider on the basis of youth wellness and our influence on that as well? For example, a lot of youth struggle with mental health as they lack a sense of purpose on behalf of not understanding their identity. Youth that don't learn about their identity can often aimlessly move around in life, unfortunately, learning more hard lessons than necessary on behalf of having the social interactions that are also educational intertwined in the process of those conversations. So it's who are their role models and mentors. So as I say in my bio, you will see my worship through the way I mentor others. The same is true on behalf of taking the time to educate youth in a way that maybe others didn't educate us in certain fields that would have privied us in preparation not to have as many headaches on behalf of the information not shared with us prior. As adults, it's on us to make sure that youth aren't misled into thinking living a life with no accountability is the best adventure, when the best adventure is that of one where responsibility is acknowledged daily in the influence we have around those we see on a daily basis, while also on ourselves as primary factors. To review ourselves as a primary factor of influence is a reminder of how, believe it or not, you are likely a role model to somebody. For the fact that you likely are a role model to somebody means that, in a sense, you have influence that you may not initially consider prior. And that's where dark psychology starts to come into the mix. Just because I'm older than somebody doesn't mean it's acceptable for me to mislead them, whether that is through false information or anything else along the lines that is unethical and unacceptable, not only within societal norms, but as the sake of being human beings. Just because someone can't do something for you doesn't automatically mean you are to mistreat them or degrade them on behalf of a certain need in which you are not able to fill on your own. Rather, it's important to acknowledge the unique gifts in which each person possesses. As each person acknowledges the purposes that they have, if they don't know it, come reach out and we could further review that. But getting back to that, it's the notion of when you understand your purpose within those lines, you are going to realize you have a gift, at least one. And then upon understanding your gift, what you're going to do is combine that with your purpose. And what happens is the future just becomes so much more brighter on behalf of you seeing the what ifs in life, to that of the glass being half full rather than living life in doubt and the glass being perceived as half empty. So, as I approach an hour here, what I'm going to do is make another video and complement this video with that video on behalf of talking more about mental health and how people can start benefiting from acknowledging their own mental health today. So I appreciate you for being here, and I'll catch you in the second video, or audio at least.